Welcome to Funnel Reboot, the podcast that shares ideas on how to upgrade your lead generation. Here is your host, Glenn Schmeltzley.
Welcome to Funnel Reboot, the show that explores how you can improve your lead generation. You're listening to part of a series on how to structure a growth team. And we're going to zoom in on the marketing resources that are part of this team and generate the sales leads. And every resourcing model that's used to do this along the in-house to outsourcing spectrum was covered in this series, 4 parts, with each guest giving their take from their own respective position along the continuum. And their views are here in these episodes, and they're in a webinar that's hosted by the agency behind this podcast, Marketing What's New. If you want to get the full panel's answers on which model is right for your company, you can go watch the recording on the Marketing What's New website. I'll include a link in the show notes, and it's ungated, so you don't need to put it in an email or anything. This episode's perspective is going to take that of a fractional marketing consultant. And as you hear our senior consultant, I'd like to call your attention to his key points. He talks about how much a fractional marketer can be accountable for meeting the objectives and target numbers you set, and the requirement that they have that they're involved in setting the inputs behind the programs that make those outcomes happen. He talks about how technologies like SaaS tools have actually made it easier now that companies are evolving their marketing function and bringing out outsourced people, just like they've brought in these outsourced tools. The fact that connecting and disconnecting with a consultant is relatively easy compared to in-house staff. I want you to hear the analogy he uses to capture the roles of both parties, likening your company to a large ship and his role like the little tugboat that ensures that the large ship stays on the right trajectory. Lastly, he deals with the stages of growth when it makes sense for a company to bring on fractional resources and how, let's say, a CMO-level consultant is needed to drop a playbook, but then can execute on some of it and maybe even train junior staff to continue executing on it after they're done. Let's go listen to what he has to say.
Hi, Glenn. Yeah, thanks for having me on today. My name is Ryan Gibson. I'm a fractional marketer, what we're talking about today. And my specialty is really content, branding, and I dive into product marketing a little bit. But I help companies execute on those parts of the business and marketing strategies to really get an impact very quickly and a high value impact quickly.
Great. Thanks for giving us a brief outline. When you try to get people aware of what the whole nature of fractional marketing is, how do you begin that description? What do you normally use to frame it so that they can kind of understand where it fits?
Well, first off, they usually look at me like I'm crazy. But it's funny because it's somewhat similar to a consultant, but it's a little different. And it's a term that we've actually seen for a lot of years for, say, human resources, finance. We've seen it with chief marketing officers and directors in the last few years. But more to your question, so what is it? It's really a senior leader, or I even like to think a mid marketer, mid-level experience, who becomes embedded into your team, but not at a full-time appointment. So they're part of the team, just not day to day. And what do they do? So they're strategic, but they can execute, and that's really the value of them.
I understand that kind of middle difference, and I'm hearing a little bit about what kind of company that would be right for. Maybe you could take me through kind of what size of company that mixture of strategic and tactical works best for. Maybe you could even tell me about a instance where you've had a really successful engagement and kind of what that company was like.
Yeah, I think it's all relative to where the company is, where they are in their growth, what they're trying to achieve. No company is alike. I think you and I understand that. Business is not a binary linear path. They expand, they contract, and that's based on all sorts of external and internal factors. Maybe they pivot, maybe they get acquired, Maybe they split off new products. Maybe they become new entities. You see that all the time. They build a thing inside their company that splits off into a new one. So in terms of your question, so how does that work with fractional marketing? Well, we come in to provide value very quickly when they need to see results quickly. And I'm working with a company right now. They're a software company. I won't talk about too much who they are, but I'm going to talk about what space they're in. They're in the e-commerce space. And they're doing very well. They're trying to grow. They have an objective to grow to X in a certain amount of time, but they don't want to bring on a full-time body, right? Or the team's at capacity for certain sections of their marketing activities. So where I come in now is I'm their fractional content manager, and I'm working with contract writers to deal with or to tackle all the objectives you want to tackle in the interim. So for example, they're working on 6-week sprints, and they want to launch a new feature for an existing product within that 6 weeks. So we, as the fractional content team, have to get everything in place that you need for that product launch within that 6-week sprint, right? And it sounds easy, but in my experience, having worked as a manager in various companies, you really get bogged down with a lot of the day-to-day. Meetings, there's process. Even if you're a senior and you have one report, there's a lot of oversight of their job, project management, so on, all the day-to-day stuff. And I always found that a lot of my time was not spent on execution, it was putting out fires. Because, what I just outlined, that's when a day goes well. What happens if, someone doesn't show up? Your CRM stops working. I was working for a company last year in-house, and our CRM was down for 48 hours. And now you're down to manual process the whole time. So all those things impede your ability to execute. So where I come in is I'm not tied to any of that in the business. I have one objective, which is to hit all these things for the product launch. We execute on them when we go to market, and then we can measure the growth or our success after the fact. So that's one example of where you would see a fractional come in. And there's many other examples that you'll see in fractional marketing and use cases that you can bring someone in for a short period of time to provide value.
I like how you've described that, and you're kind of calling out a myth that at least I got this sense from what you said. The thought might be, if there's, let's say, a C-level person listening to this, the founder of a smaller size company, they might think that if they just put more people on a marketing problem, that makes it better. And you're saying, no, that's not necessarily better, because there's all that oversight that you have to do. And there has to be, for things that are time sensitive or critical to the company's business strategy that they must be executed on, it's a good idea to look at people who don't get fettered by that, management work, to be able to just run with it. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. I mean, it's not that when I was a manager in-house, I didn't want to do these things. There's just only so many hours in the day, right? And you're prioritizing not only against your deliverables, but you're trying to help other teams succeed. There's sales enablement, customer success. There's all these different areas that a marketer needs to touch on. And maybe you just need the bandwidth of another 3 to 4 hours, right? So bringing in some external help, that's not a full-time role, because you probably don't want to invest in all the overheads of a full-time role for an extra 3 to 4 hours of bandwidth a day or a week. This is a good way to do it. And a consultant, historically, how we look at them is that they come in, and how I've experienced them, is they come in with a really good playbook. They have a lot of really great experience. They're wonderful. But you're buying the playbook, and that's it. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. But a lot of times, the teams still don't have either the skill set or the bandwidth to execute on that playbook. So a fractional marketer is sort of an evolution of that, where I can bring a playbook, and I can also roll up my sleeves and help you get it done. And that's a different value proposition than someone who's a consultant. Both are fine. It's just, what do you need for a company? And you might only need that for 6 months. Because let's go back to my example. Say this was the only product launch they were doing for the entire fiscal year, then they don't need me after the 6 weeks, and we shake hands and we walk away and everyone's happy, right? I say breaking up is easy to do as a fractional marketer. So, because that's the nature of the relationship. And it's better for the business because it's fiscally responsible rather than bringing on a full-time body, unless you think that you need a full-time body to grow, which is fine too. But if you're looking for just a shot of adrenaline into your marketing activities, then a fractional marketer might be the avenue for you.
Gotcha. We're acknowledging that this thing, I like how you called it an evolution, because I think it is in response to another evolution. And I'm getting kind of Darwinian here, but it's like,
it's okay. Roll with it. I'm good with that.
As the trees grew taller, the need for those large kind of horse-like creatures on the African savanna to grow long necks and reach the fruit on the trees, that's how we got giraffes. It seems to me that the marketing function itself changed. At least I'm talking about companies who've stayed with the times, and the marketing function has exploded in its breadth. I mean, you talked about an e-commerce or, technology-based company, SaaS companies would fit here too. The number of things that marketing has to touch is way broader than if we go back a few decades to a manufacturer or to a, professional services firm.
Oh, completely. And it's interesting you use those two examples, to sort of stay in that philosophical mindset. I came from food service. That was really my background when I was cutting my teeth. Food service retail, which is very different than software. But in those manufacturing and retail, what you've seen for the last 3 to 4 decades is giant supply chains where subsections of each have been outsourced, right? So I worked for a coffee shop. A coffee shop chain. We did 100 units across the country back in the early 2000s. And there were so many parts of my business that were outsourced, in addition to marketing, right? All my products were outsourced, or I had this part outsourced, or so accounting and finance and so on and so on and so on, because that's what made sense for our business, right? Yeah. And today, if you go back through, I'm going to really generalize marketing history right now. So a lot of professors might get really angry with me, but I'm going to really make it simple. So, the Mad Men days, the agency of record existed for quite some time, and you'd outsource that. And it was very simple because the channels and the tactics were very straightforward, right? You only had a few, maybe radio, print, TV, magazines, and you had an agency that was doing graphic and copy, and they're putting those products out and servicing your needs. Now, today, and then what you saw, I guess I'm going to say around the year of Salesforce, is a lot of stuff being brought in-house. A lot of those specific older channels, right? And then some of the newer ones that existed, but in its infancy with social media and Google and so on. Now what you're finding, to touch on what you just said, there's so much you can do in marketing. And, I wrote a little list here, SEO, SEM, email, automation, content syndication, organic and paid social listening, chat, influencer marketing, account-based marketing, which is now a big one that's, exploded in the last 5 years, virtual conferences, which are probably going to be a big thing in this environment, lead scoring, operations, partner marketing, there's so much. How can you expect one marketer to do all of that effectively? I don't think that's a realistic expectation. So I think what you're going to see is a movement to that outsourcing. We've seen in other traditional industries for the last 3 or 4 decades, now in knowledge-based industries like software, where you're going to have chunks of your marketing, production, and supply chain probably outsourced to different areas because you need that piece for a little bit, but you don't want to spend or you don't have the budget to spend, for a full-time or a team on it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it very much does. The fact that you, brought it from an industry where outsourcing was the norm, I think is a perfect indicator of, how it seems to be happening in more and more places. Do you think that the attitude of a typical, business leader, be they, a person with a marketing title or not. Do you think the attitude is more receptive now than it might have been 10 years ago, in regular, let's take a typical B2B or, a company with a high value product? Do you think that they're getting more accustomed to thinking of outsourcing, or do you think that they're stuck in the past?
No, I think it's changing, and I think I'm a living example of that. But I think it's changing with the CMOs and directors, or even CEOs, that have grown up in the new knowledge economy way of structuring a business. Just the word tech stack. How new is that really when you think of the history of businesses and marketing? And the average, you would know more than I would, Glenn. Like, what's the average tool in a tech stack now?
Oh, companies have at least half a dozen.
Yeah. Those are all 6 businesses, right? Servicing
True.
your business. So you're outsourcing really your tools, but you still need people to drive them. You need people to understand how they work. You need people to understand the data. And I think as, there's more channels than ever, 600 channels and nothing on. I'm updating myself probably with that.
Yeah.
I think you'll see marketing leaders who understand that there's different ways to success in the market and different paths know that, okay, I need to use these. I'm looking at my annual planning or maybe my half year planning. I know I want to hit these things, or I need these things and these skill sets to hit the objectives that us as the executive team have laid out. But it's going to cost me an arm and a leg to bring everyone in-house. I may not even find them because it's still the competition for talent, especially marketing and sales today, is very high. Even in this environment, I still think it's going to be the case. So I will probably want to outsource different sections of those those skills and tactics I need to drive those business outcomes rather than bring it all in-house. Someone who didn't grow up with those tools and those new ways of doing things probably won't have that natural instinct, but the newer ones will, because the COO I report to right now with the client I just discussed, we come from the same generations, brought up the same way, same tools, same path to market, so they get it, right? And they had no issue, or they saw the value in working with a fractional marketer, right? Until maybe they want to bring it in-house.
I love that point about the generations. And yes, I do think that the lens that they use to look at it has a lot to do with how they approach this. When it comes to how they prioritize, though, do you recommend that people just make their choices about what's going to be in their tech stack and then go look for people with those tools? Do they pick what is in their tech stack and then look for people who have the understanding of what the tool does, but maybe they don't worry if they don't know that exact tool because they'll pick it up? Like, when you're asked to take on a new tool, do you dig your heels in and say, no, I really prefer to use another tool? Or do you say, yeah, sure, I've learned 3 tools already. A 4th one is going to be a walk in the park.
Do you mean me as a fractional marketer, or
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's a good question. I think my job as a fractional marketer is to learn new tools on my own, if that makes sense.
Sure.
Because I think the value I bring is that you have a certain objective that you want to fulfill in a short period of time. And short can be 6 months, right? Maybe, I'm not speaking 6 weeks. It could be 6 months that we engage. Now, if you want me to spend that time onboarding into a new tool, I would probably actually say it's not a good value of your time, and you probably want to find someone else. And that sounds weird because it sounds like I'm turning off business, but that's my philosophy is I want to help businesses succeed, not take their money. That's not the point. So the point is, so I would say I want to stick to what I know now, but I want to expand my value offering by learning new tools on my own accord. Does that make sense?
Sure. I think so. I mean, I can see it working in a case where let's take marketing automation. So several good tools out there. You've probably been exposed to a few of them. And let's say that there is a junior in-house person who doesn't even know what the tool does.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the fact that you do, and you can come in, I would think means that you could probably just get familiar enough with the tool that you recognize how to do a type of campaign that you're very used to doing in this tool. And then you document and you hand off the process. The junior person picks it up and off to the races they go.
Yeah. So that's, I would say yes. So an example for me is I have someone I work with now. She's a marketing operations person. I sort of brought her along in my career because she's wonderful. And when we first started working together, she was tasked with just figuring out HubSpot. She didn't know HubSpot. We had put her through the training, but she still needed to get better at it and get better at it faster. So we actually brought in a HubSpot fractional marketer to work with her 10 hours a week, and they worked together. So he didn't just say, oh, you need to do this and audit. They actually worked on the projects and putting together the CRM in a way that it made sense for our business. So yeah, I mean, in that case, a fractional marketer is going to make an impact very quickly. But if it was someone coming to me as a fractional marketer and say, we want you to learn this tool, we're going to pay for you. I'm like, well, you can, but it's going to take a while, and you're not going to get the results that you want to see, because the objectives we just laid out was you want to have this much result in this much amount of time. So I think it all comes down to what's the problem you need to solve, right?
Yes. Yeah. And it sounds like they can get broad with you, meaning that they can kind of bring you around to their side of the table and go, well, I have all of these problems. Yeah. Which ones should I try? And you're willing to say to them, well, this would not be the best use of me, but like that HubSpot one, look, I think the answer looks like 10 hours a week, shadowing, being shadowed, a person being shadowed by that junior marketer. And at the end of a certain amount of time of doing that, you will have a process which is repeatable and that marketer can do on their own. Yeah. Right. So you're actually helping to determine the strategy, right, that it pulls off with. And that makes that only comes, I imagine, because you're quite broad. That, if you were a person who was, let's say, a tools first person, it'd be very hard for you to provide that higher level strategy, because to you, every solution would look like, well, I just have to pull out my tool and use the tool.
Yeah, I agree. Right. And there's only a benefit. It's only because I've sat at higher level positions in organizations that I can see that. Yeah. And I still what I think for a fractional marketer, I think you still need a niche to be successful, but you need a broad understanding of how a business shapes objectives and goals. You don't necessarily have to have put together an annual operating plan, but you need to have at least had some type of interaction with a C-suite or some type of executive team and understand, what do they need to do across the board to be successful, and where do I fit in? Businesses just get more complex as they get more successful and they grow, because you have all the different pieces that are trying to work together to move the iceberg along, or move that giant ship. Yep. And, I was thinking today, what's a good analogy? It's like, I'm sort of like a tugboat where, okay. I understand, nautical, how to pilot a ship. It's not pilot a ship, but, I understand all the ways to drive a ship forward, but I'm not the big one there. I'm just sort of helping it move along.
That's great. That's really good. And that actually brings me to the next one, which maybe you can provide that assisting role to the captain of a company who's got a worry. And one worry I can hear them coming up with is, but what about the institutional memory? Like, how do I make sure, if I'm going to go to someone for a fractional involvement, that we don't watch the core understanding of how we do our marketing float outside our walls? Now, as we record this is in the impact of the pandemic, and a lot of people are working remotely. So I'm not referring physically to the walls, but when they're worried that after that person's engagement is over, will they kind of have an amnesia? Will they not know how to do the next marketing rollout? So what would you say to them to help them? Like, as you said, you're a tugboat, so you're kind of nudging them. But how do you say to them, look, the bulk of that institutional memory is going to stay with you. It's not like you're handing it off to me and it just vanishes in the night.
Yeah. Well, I would say that worry exists with any employee in any organization, full-time, part-time. But that doesn't answer your question. So I think that it comes down to, how do you prepare them for success after you have left? I'll talk about how I've done it.
Go for it.
Because I just wound down with one client now, and it had to do specifically with the environment we're in, where they're trying to preserve cash flow. So I get it, right? And like I said, breaking up's easy to do. So I understand cash flow, right? As someone who's worked with C-level executives for a long time, I get it. Cash flow is the lifeblood. So if you need to preserve cash, then that's the core objective for the environment, for the business, what it needs to do. So it's okay for me to step back. And I'm in a position where I can do that. So how I prepared them was, they have everything I've ever done. So every scrap of paper I've written digitally, but every project, every note, every deliverable, it's all in one shared drive on Google. I use Google for my clients, and they have access to it, and they own all those assets. They also have, what I did before, what how we ramped up, what I did during that time, and then what I think they need to do next. And and that's in writing, but also was verbally relayed in an ending meeting, almost like an exit interview style, right? For lack of a better term, because that's my responsibility. I see it as that you engaged me to help you be successful, not just where you are now, but in the future, especially for what I do, which is content. Because, with SEO, an article might not even start really getting good till 4 or 5 months down the line after you've published it. And then it really starts driving results for an organization. I might be gone. So what do they do with that really high quality asset now? So I have to help give them that roadmap.
Right. Or tell them that you were developing it, knowing that it may not get going within the time that you're still working with them.
Yeah. So I think it's all about being very honest and transparent, lots of communication, and setting up for success after the fact. So you ensure, there's always going to be a bit of a loss of institutional memory. I think that's just a given, but I try to mitigate that as much as I can.
I think that's great. And I think the transparency with which you start the relationship, knowing that it's got an ending, right? I mean, by definition, you're fractional, so you're not looking to be hired full time. So there is a life cycle arc to it. And it sounds to me like you just bake that into everything you do, so that, the breakup, if you call it that, is as easy as possible. Mm-hmm. Tell me about different work styles. So if I'm a company that has, you mentioned like the 6-week sprints that you had with certain writers. Let's say I've got another company that they are very short. They have an agile, very tight scrum, maybe a 10-day or 2-week kind of sprint, or even another kind of organization that might be waterfall. There are still some of those, kind of formal project management folks out there. Yeah. How do you are you chameleon-like in that you shift your manner of work to fit that work style, or do you like to look out for certain firms? And do you think that fractional consulting is better with a certain kind of work style?
Mm-hmm. I like to see myself as chameleon. I think, again, it all comes down to circumstance and what the business needs. So, sometimes in 2-week sprints, that can be an early stage company that really hasn't found product market fit. And that I probably wouldn't service well, because how I think I work better in an environment where you have a product, you understand how you want to get into the market and execute on it. That being said, though, I gave an example of a company maybe that has built a process in-house and they've all of a sudden discovered high value for it. and that's got to get spit out now, and they've got to grow traction in the market. That's different. And the reason that's different to me is they already have a base coming in of cash flow, right? They have
Yes.
a business that's working, and they can experiment. And I'm a luxury in many ways, if that makes sense, that I can work fast, I provide value fast, but I only make sense in a business that has some health to it, and can invest in that. And an early stage company can't necessarily invest in that until they've gotten, say, an A or a B seed round, right? Does that make sense?
It does. And as part of the series, we're going to be talking with somebody who has who is at that stage and who's doing it on their own. They're a DIY marketer. Very similar to how it is with us. As you know, I'm head of an agency. And so we're also looking for companies that are post product market fit and have, that cash flow that facilitates them finding ways to grow. They want to grow fast. They want to grow profitably. So, you and we are quite similar in kind of where we're looking at that company to hit its stride.
Yeah.
When it comes to that, what do you suggest they use as metrics to measure you?
That's a good question. So, I'll talk about what I like for me as my tactic, and then what I would suggest as someone who's engaged in a fractional marketer. So for me, I'm content, right? That's really what I do well, and that's sort of been my history. And I think it starts with, again, what are the problems you're trying to solve? And with content, it could be search. How do you want to increase the ability for people to find you? It could be awareness. And awareness to me is public relations and PR, not just in the traditional sense, but your podcast, like you're part of a public relations and part of a discussion for creating awareness around what we do. Or there's audience building, and that's really, to make it general, how many people on LinkedIn, how many people on Facebook. All three of those are very different, right? And they have different objectives. So we need to sit and nail down the objectives and measure me against, did we achieve what we want, right? Maybe it's just, I want to close more deals, right? So then I'm thinking, okay, maybe it's further down the funnel, and the sales team needs a whole bunch of different things to
it's enablement.
Shorten the sales cycle, right? It's all different. So what is the objectives? And then for me as a fractional marketer, did I do it in the time frame that I said I was going to do it? Because I should know, based on our meeting of describing the objectives, how long it should take, right? If I'm seasoned, right? I might be off by a few hours here and there, but I shouldn't say, oh, that's going to take 3 weeks if I know it's going to take 3 months, or vice versa.
Yes,
because I'm not going to, depending on how I bill out, I'm probably not going to overbill you for a bazillion hours, because I understand how long something's going to take. So you're buying my services, right? So I think if you set the objectives out, these are what we want to do, and this is the price point for your engagement, and did we hit it? Those are sort of the metrics. Now, it's different than I think what people are used to, where it's, okay, how many leads did I get in? Are they qualified? And what's the revenue? And it's a little more generic. But again, we're just building process and systems and tools to grow a business, to then see what the return is going to be down the end. Like, marketing is not as linear and binary as we want it to be, even with all our wonderful tools, right?
Sure. Well, and maybe that dividing line that you're suggesting between the more generic metrics that you're going to come in and on a very short tactical time frame, shore up, versus the main funnel metrics that should be core to any company.
Yeah.
I think we're both agreed that that's never being outsourced to anybody. There are certainly people that are helping, but
exactly.
That a founder or the person who's heading up the marketing function or sales function in a company, they are ultimately responsible to their company. But would it be fair to say, if I contrast you with, let's say, an agency, I know an agency will also say that they'll get behind those numbers, and if that's what the engagement is set up to do, that they're okay with being held accountable for numbers. But It's different with you because in your case, it's Ryan. Like
Yeah.
Ryan is the guy. We put the number on Ryan's name. We don't put the number on this whole outsourced team's name, right? Do you
Yeah,
see a
that's fair.
difference there? Like, is that do you feel that that brings a little more heft to your commitment of saying, yeah, no, I'll fall on my sword if I don't make that number, or I won't bill you, for all the extra work it took to get there?
Yeah, I'm putting my reputation on the line, right?
Yes.
Maybe another way to even look at that question is, I with my current client that I just spoke of, the example, I'm part of the ALP planning. I'm part of setting the timeline over the quarters for how things are going to get completed, and then I'm held accountable for saying this is what we want to do in Q2 because it's going to impact this in Q3. That's on me, right? Like any employee would be. Whereas a consultant doesn't have that level of accountability. So it's not for the meek, right? There's a certain level of responsibility that you have that you need to execute. But I enjoy that. That speaks to me and what I like to do, which is be part of the strategy and help them achieve and have that level of risk, for lack of a better word. So, I agree with you. An agency, there's more people, and the agency is the one that sort of is holding the bag. It's just me, right? So, if anyone wants to dip their toes in the fractional marketing, that's something they need to be aware of. But on the reverse side, for somebody who wants to hire a fractional marketer, there's just only one person. That's me. Now, an agency might say, well, they have an account manager. But an account manager can then say, "Oh, that person, it was all the team that didn't." So,
yes.
They can sort of shore off. They can slide off any type of incidents maybe that went wrong. I don't know. I worked for an agency, so maybe that doesn't happen.
No, but let's keep it on that vantage point of from the fractional marketer. I'll start by saying that I think people have heard industry stories of, and this is true mostly in the large agencies where they're owned by holding companies, and they've got factories of resources that are underutilized, and they're simply willing to take any piece of business because that helps them fill that utilization and then hit a quarterly number that this holding company wants to see. They'll take anything that comes through the door. Is it fair to say that because you're willing to put your own reputation on the line and be accountable to a KPI, that you're careful about which companies you choose to work with?
100%.
What do you use as your criteria? I want the person listening to this, if they are thinking of bringing in a fractional person, what are the things that fractional person is expecting of them?
Yeah, I mean, I think they have an understanding of the nature of the relationship and what I bring. So that's education on my part, right? I'm here to build out a section of their business, not all of it. But if I do a good job as a fractional marketer, my work will probably impact different sections of their business, right? Sales, customer success, so on and so forth. I think that they need to understand they're buying a process and they need to really trust it. It's tough, right? Marketing is I've heard someone say before, marketing is one of those things people think is easy and everyone can do, right? I'm not sure if you get that, but
I've heard us described as the Department of Arts and Crafts.
Yeah. And I understand why people say that. I don't begrudge them for that, but we don't say that to, coders, right? I don't start sifting through their HTML or their Ruby code and why'd you put that there? Like it doesn't make any sense for me to do that. Now I want feedback. I want people's input about, my work, and I want them to ask questions. That's wonderful. I need that to succeed. But, to be the driver of that, I feel like I'm the one bringing the expertise on that. So I think, before they engage with me, I'm here to help you build out a section. I'm here to work on a precise thing. I bring expertise. I'm going to help you with strategy. But I'm not going to be a catch-all to everything you need. Right. I don't know. Did I answer your question?
Well, yeah, I think, you're definitely asking questions of them. Would it be fair to say that you're expecting honesty from them, especially, you asked like, what's your strategy?
Yeah.
And, you're expecting them, if it's the truth, to say, we don't have one.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. I want
right.
to,
And so
yeah,
if you want, they do have to let you in on some deep, dark secrets.
they do. On
Right.
it, it only works when we're honest with each other. And I want to have a conversation. If I was going to meet someone for the first time, let's just say, because it happens, people call me and ask me about what I do and how I can help. And I just want to hear everything, warts and all,
Yeah.
because I can't help if I don't know where the problems might lie, or challenges. Challenges is a better word because challenges can be overcome. So I don't know where the challenges lie, and how you want to, where do you want to be 6 months from now, and how can I help you jump over those hurdles? If I don't know that, and you don't give me all those elements, I might spend time in areas where it's not benefiting the business. Because at the end of the day, what I care about are business outcomes. I care about how much revenue you've closed. How much, what's your deal flow? What's your pipeline? Which is strange. A lot of people find those questions weird from a marketer, but that's, I think my role is to, whatever the channel is, and I highlighted them. Is it awareness? Is it search? Is it audience? Or is it more lower funnel stuff? We've chosen that for one core objective, and are we meeting those objectives? And how am I going to help you do that? So I need to hear whether you think you're doing those well or not, because then the strategy kicks in, right?
I can't help but notice that when you're talking about those things, and I'm hearing the passion with which you really want to see them helped in a company, words like freelancer or free agent, I don't know if it's just the English language, but they seem to me to suggest that you're aloof and that you are indifferent to
Yeah.
whether the company wants to do something, right? And the way you speak, it's anything but. So maybe would it be fair to kind of wrap this whole thing up by saying, if people are going to consider that kind of fractional outsource model, they shouldn't immediately assume that means that person doesn't take a concern for their outcomes that has to be rivaling the concern that, let's say, an employee would have.
Can you rephrase that question?
Sure. So do you think, even though you're outsourced, that the way people should look at you is they should not assume that you don't care, but that they should think that you care just about on the same level as an employee whose, livelihood depends on that company succeeding? You care just about as much as that person.
Yeah, I do. Sometimes maybe more, depending on what the person is doing in the company, right? Because that's the nature of how I want to engage with the business. I love it. Like, it's my family. I grew up in entrepreneurship. My dad was one for years. I've been around them. When I worked in food service as a director, part of my job was to sell businesses to people, right? I used to work at Invest Ottawa here, which is that's the entrepreneurial hub for the city of Ottawa, and I worked with entrepreneurs, help shape their communications and their PR at the time, without getting too much of my history. So I've worked with entrepreneurs my whole life.
Love it.
I love helping them meet their goals, but you need to understand how that works. And if you don't, I think you can still be successful as a freelancer or a free agent, as part of an organization. But it's harder for you, I think, to tie your actions to business outcomes if you've never worked in a company at that level, or at least under someone's coached you on how to do it or been somewhat part of it. It's tougher to do that because we talked earlier, like cash flow, I get it right away. It's like every CEO in the world, probably gets their cash flow statement every week, first thing on Monday. Okay, how much money we got in the bank, right? Like that's critical. So when you start understanding what do businesses need at a baseline, and how do you tie your actions to that, you can be very choosy, and you can be very specific, and you can be very efficient with your time, because then the outcomes to get to those things and the strategies or a lot more clear.
Yeah, yeah. You were delving a little bit into the history. Would you just tell me, I heard about the stuff where you were kind of at that entrepreneurial phase. Tell me just about how you made that transition over into what is today, giving people organic traffic and an awareness of how content plays such a large role in marketing, generating attention and engagement. You've got a background with some writing in it, am I correct?
Yeah, so I have a weird, I guess everyone says that my background's weird. Everyone has a really interesting path, right?
Sure.
Which is great. That's what makes people wonderful, is like they're really special, unique path to where they are now.
Yeah.
I like I said, I started in food service for years, and I was a director of marketing operations, mostly operations with a bit of marketing, but I loved the marketing. I just ate it up. And it was really fun. And that was food service is very impulse driven, very on site, very, a lot of quick ad copy, but back when I was there, we did a website. And it was the first website I did back in 2001. We had to outsource it, funny enough, right? Because I didn't know how to code. Now I could just use, Wix or Squarespace, or, throw a rock and name your tool. But by the time I got through that, I had spent a lot of time in food service, because I grew up in it really young. So I shifted gears, went back to school, took broadcasting, and ended up as a reporter at CBC for a few years, TV and radio. So that was wonderful, and that's where I really cut my teeth on storytelling, because you want to learn how to tell stories. Work for the national broadcaster in Canada, and they just whipped me into shape. And then that came to an end because journalism wasn't really going to be my path. And I ended up moving over to Invest Ottawa. So to your question, that's where it really started to click for me, because when I was in food service, storytelling was very general, right? Buy this thing here right now as you're walking by, right?
Yes.
It's not like it is now, where Instagram is helping me generate awareness around the products I like. Is very, very different, right? So as I just watched and learned and watched businesses grow, and this is by the time where Shopify was starting to rise.
Sure.
I was just watching them and watching their marketing, and I was like, wow, they do an amazing job. So I was just learning. I learned very quickly the power of words and content for a business in the new world, because what's the first thing we do now? Like, we just open up our phone and type something into Google to either learn or to discover or what have you, right? Yeah. So that was, like, to your question, that's where it stood off for me. And then I worked in companies in Ottawa, and then I worked in the private sector a little bit, just crafting those skills. And then I decided, well, I think I want to do this as a service for companies as a specialist. And then I just stumbled across fractional marketing a year ago, and it just, the light went on.
Right.
Because I'm an entrepreneur at heart. Right?
Yeah.
And I want to work with businesses and not necessarily be in them. That doesn't mean I won't be part of a business in the future and join a team. But for now, this is really fun for me. And you can tell by my career, because I've jumped around so much, that it's the excitement of helping people get results quickly over a short period of time and help them success. Like that's just it gets me going. Like, that's what drives me.
For sure. What I can say is that this current incarnation of Ryan definitely looks like a fusion of all the things that came before it.
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
Right. So, and that's great to be able to find something that draws all those threads together. This has been really fun. Ryan, how can people get a hold of you?
LinkedIn. I don't have a website. I'm a holdout, I guess. Probably should have one. But LinkedIn has been amazing. Like that platform in the last 2 years, it's just bananas what it does for people. And that's really where I talk to people, engage with people, and people can message me. Happy to talk to anyone, right?
I'll include your LinkedIn profile in the show notes.
Yeah, or you just type in Ryan Paul Gibson into Google. Trust me, I'll probably be the first one that pops up. You'll see some of my old CBC stories, and you can laugh at how bad of a reporter I was.
No, I doubt that. Well, listen, hey, thank you so much for being on the show.
Hey, no, thank you. This has been great. I really enjoyed it.
Thanks for listening. Follow the show on Twitter @Funnel Reboot. If you like what you have heard today, please consider leaving a review wherever you get your podcasts.